Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of That Solo Life, the podcast for PR pros and marketers who work for themselves. People like me, Michelle Kane with Voice Matters, and my wonderful co host, Karen Swim of Solo PR Pro. But today we are joined by a guest. We are joined by Axel Ebermann. He is a communication strategist and organizer who focuses on emerging technology in public policy. And we have him here because he's an incredible visual storyteller and he's going to speak on deep fakes and all of that good and not so good stuff. Welcome,
Yeah,
Axel.
Thank you for
welcome.
having me. I'm excited.
We
We're
are
very excited too. I'm so Axel and I connected via PRSA, and you've done some fascinating research on deep fakes. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I have a background in filmmaking. I used to be a news
mm,
reporter. I was a war reporter. I was a documentary director for a long time, and
wow.
also worked in advertising. And so as far as communication is concerned, the visual aspect of it is very dear to my heart, obviously, because that's where I come from. And I also have a technical background from filmmaking. And so I looked at what is coming up in terms of deepfakes and synthetic media, right? And I saw that whenever I talk to fellow communicators about this, I got like a very big stare, and I'm like,
Mm,
yeah. And either they had never heard of it, or they didn't know what to do with it, or they
right.
couldn't really conceptualize what it would mean for them. Um, so as part of a master's degree, I did a research study, a pretty extensive research study, to actually find out like how prepared are communicators for deepfake and synthetic media. And that was a survey. I followed that up with interviews to get a little bit more flavor. And let's put it this way: the results were not really good, right? I interviewed a number of people from nonprofit think tanks, Fortune 500 companies, and you have VPs of communication from Fortune 500 companies who had never heard of the term. They really didn't know what it was, right? And I also interviewed some experts to basically tech experts to contrast it. And it became very clear that there's a huge discrepancy between
Mm,
where the tech folks are and what they understand, and where the communicators are. A lot of communicators still think they're the guys with the typewriters, right? And we write a news release, right, and that goes out. But if you look how communication has evolved, right, it's like visual communication is very strong right now, and it's growing as a proportion of communication overall. And yeah, so if you're basically going on the cutting edge of what is done there, there seems to be a lot of lack in education and a necessity to act, and that is what basically came out of that study.
wow.
You
That's
know,
amazing.
yeah, and one of the things that you said is, and I think this is something that we need to explore more as a profession, is that we've always treated visuals as an asset of communications, but not seeing it as a rich communication medium, and one that deserves to be treated just like all the other communication channels in terms of verifying authenticity and what we're truly communicating and protecting brand reputation. We just really think of it as an asset in most cases. I mean, we understand how a visual helps to tell a story, but I think that we have to evolve our thinking and how we think of visual storytelling and really become more proficient at it. And then understand that just as we're battling mismail and disinformation with printed medium and even digital channels and social, that we are battling that same thing with visuals as well.
That's so
And
true.
I think what is happening there too, and that's where I'm kind of lucky, because I come from a video and filmmaking background,
Yeah.
is that it is complicated, right? It's a whole different skill set and a whole different language. And I think there is we always avoid things that we feel like we don't have a good handle on, right? So I think the industry as a whole could actually be further, but I see a lot of people avoiding it, right? They're like, oh, this video stuff, right? And then you have to deal with cameras and microphones and all that stuff, right? A lot of people are simply afraid of it, right? There's a certain bias just to avoid it, right? And the tendency to be like, no, I'd rather write something, right? Because I know how to do that.
Right.
But I think we cannot afford to do that anymore as
No,
communicators.
no. And I love what you said about, we're used to typing words, but we need to keep in mind that everything communicates. From a facial expression at a big meeting, your client is communicating. So let's break it down to the deep fake and synthetic media 101. Can you just explain
Yeah.
what they are to our audience, just so we can make sure we're all getting in at the ground level on the same page?
100%. So just to pedal back just a little bit, is image manipulation, right, is not something that is new, right? We all know the term photoshopped, right? That's part of our vocabulary. We kind of expect that, right? And that is something also where that has evolved, right? When Photoshop came out, everybody thought it would be the end of the veracity of images, right? And the real story is a little bit more complicated, right? We have learned to look at pictures that way, right? We know they could be fake, but most of them are not, right? And so people have become educated, and it's not a black and white, right? It became a nuanced gray area where communicators know how to deal with photoshopped images. And that is something most probably where the video world also will have to go. And I'm going to show a quick example here, right? So this is a picture of the Russian dictator Stalin. And whenever somebody fell out of favor and they ended up in the gulag, he had just somebody remove him from the official images. That was very time consuming, right? It was literally an art form, right?
Yeah.
You had people who would sit there and they would scrape off material from the photographic plates and paint it in, right? It is incredible. And you couldn't really do that at scale, right? Stalin could do that, but it's not that somebody would just flood the market with that. So now video is substantially harder, right? Because you're not dealing with one frame, you're dealing with 24 frames a second usually, and every single one would have to be retouched. And people do that. I have an example here that is from The Black Swan, a movie with Natalie Portman. And they did facial replacement here. That's Natalie Portman, and you see all the ballerinas on the left, and they replaced all their faces with Natalie Portman's face, right? And that is, you can do that if you're in Hollywood and you are ready to spend a couple of $1 million just on this one shot, right? It is very, very time consuming and very expensive. But what has changed with deepfakes is that somebody came up with artificial intelligence algorithms that can do that for you, that you can train. And you don't need a Hollywood studio anymore, right? You can do that on a laptop, and you can go online and you can download the software for free. It doesn't cost anything. And if you're a little bit computer literate, you just train that codec, and it gets better and better and better and spits out photorealistic deepfakes. And New York University did a test, right? And they took people who had never done it before and gave them the platform, and took most of them about 4 hours to make one. It was that quick, right? And that was about 5 months ago. And this field evolved so quickly that by now it's most probably already different.
Wow.
And just to make a distinction, so there's deepfakes, right? Deepfakes are video clips where you basically show people do or say something that they really didn't say or do. Synthetic media is the bigger envelope. Basically, it's anything in terms of media that is computer generated by artificial intelligence codecs. That could be speech, right? Voice, recorded voice. I could take the voice from you from this podcast, feed it into a computer, and then I can make you say whatever I want to, and nobody would know the difference. It could be in the last months, there were phenomenal advances in text to speech, right? basically you just type something,
President
and
Trump.
if you see here, so this is text-to-speech. This is software. It's called Dull-E, right? And you just type in something, and here people type in just some absurd stuff, like, I don't know, a photo of a corgi dog riding a bicycle with sunglasses in the middle of Times Square, and it gives you a photorealistic depiction of that. And what else do we have here? This person does not exist, right? There's a web page. You can go on there. It's called thispersondoesnotexist.com. And every time you refresh the browser, it makes new pictures of people who don't exist. The computer just has learned how to make. So if you look at the young kid, there's an artifact on the hair that doesn't look quite right. But the other guys, you wouldn't know that they're not real. Right, and they have, the computers have glitches, right? But that is basically because this is not even supervised; it's just a web page, right? And if you look at it, this is from a university. This is the core thing, how it works. So you basically have one frame from a source. I could basically just pull a frame from you from this video podcast, and then drive it with my head movement and apply to pretty much any painting, any person. And I can do that in real time, right? So just to introduce a little, Twilight Zone moment, how do you know this is even me?
Right.
No, I mean, this is going to
Yeah,
be a
you're
real
right.
implication.
You're right.
So
Okay.
I've read articles that companies, and that is also where communication comes in, right?
Yeah.
Companies and HR departments have received fake job applications, right, of people who simply don't exist, and they just flood their HR, maybe to troll them, maybe to test it, right? But the computer writes entire bios and generates fake images. LinkedIn had a huge problem, and they cracked down on it a little bit, that they had thousands and thousands of profiles of people that simply didn't exist, and they look 100% real, right? And video will catch up. So right now, like the model I just showed you, I could just use that, and if I train it enough, by now or in a couple of months, it would be good enough. That I could just have a different face talk to you, right? And you wouldn't know. You would never know. And just a quick thing. And so the genius of and the new thing about these deepfakes is how they're created, right? You had to do this all by hand. And by now, the computer does it for you, right? And it's basically GAN networks. It's a fancy term. It's called generative adversarial networks, right? And what they do is you have two networks that work against each other, right? So the first network says, this is an image of Axel. I just made this for you. And it looks terrible, right? And the second network is the discriminator and says, no, that doesn't look like Axel at all, right? Then the second and says, because of A, B, and C. Then the first network says, oh, let me do this better, sends another image back. The second, and if you do this 1 billion times, right, at one point, the discriminator will say, yeah, this is Axel. I don't see a difference anymore. But it is fully automated, right? And that is the genius of that. And that works with images, that works with voice, that works with video, right? And it's fully automated. And that is also the big difference. You don't have to do that stuff manually anymore. And of course, we have this incredible distribution platform of the internet, right? It's like, if I create something like that, I can literally roll it out at scale at zero cost right now. All I need to do is put it out. Enragement is engagement. If I basically have something that is really slanderous or really horrible, right? The internet giants will do all the work for me. They will pick this up and distribute it. And this is why deepfakes and synthetic media is something that we do need to pay attention to, because the access is going to be much easier. You can do it at almost no cost by now. And the distribution platform is biased to push this kind of stuff.
So this is all scarier than a Jordan Peele movie. And now I'm just going to be walking around like I trust nothing.
Oh,
But kind of cool, because I would not hate a robot version of me to stand in and do a whole bunch of stuff and just like take all my meetings, robot Karen. You can have it, and I will go do other stuff with my time. But I,
yeah.
so I think the big question for me is, as a communicator, and I'm aware that this exists. I do try to look at photos and be discerning, and I take information with a grain of salt and try to research it. But as a communicator, how do we spot this? Like, because the technology is becoming better. I feel like
Mhm.
a couple of years ago, when you saw these deepfake photos or videos, it was pretty detectable, but it's getting smarter and smarter. And to your credit, you've just explained why. So how do we verify the integrity of a source?
So just to pick up on what you just said, right? I mean, that is the problem for communicators, right? Is that it's called truth decay, right? It becomes kind of like an information nihilism, right? Where everybody says, I don't know if this is real anymore. But as communicators, right, we are storytellers. That is our main thing. We're going to try to tell people a story, and we hope they're going to believe us. And that requires trust. If there's zero trust anymore, and everybody's, I don't know, I mean, Karen, if that is really true, it becomes harder and harder. And one point, you just don't get anything through anymore.
Mhm.
And there's also an idea of, it's called flooding the zone, right? And disinformation players do this, that they just put so much garbage out that it becomes virtually impossible for recipients of the communication to sort out what's true or not. And there's another term that works with that. It's called the liar's dividend, right? It's like crying wolf, right? If you lie 100 times, then something is true, you can even deny that, right?
Yeah.
There was a fantastic example. It's the weirdest example of any deep fake. There was a girl who was, I think she was on a cheerleader team, and she was smoking and got caught on video, and somebody wanted to slander her, kick her off the team. There was some teenage rivalries, right? And she was shown smoking. So like, oh no, that was a deep fake. And the entire thing blew completely out of proportion. It went to the Supreme Court of that state. I forgot what it was, right? Because somebody said, oh, somebody deepfaked that and it's illegal and whatsoever. And at the end, nobody really knows what really happened. It was most probably not a deepfake, and the team just said it because it was expedient, right? But it became this huge thing, right? And went through the courts, and just because she could deny it, she's like, no, that's a deepfake. Right, and that is the biggest risk. So what can we do about it? So it really depends a little bit of where everybody is, right? So first of all, individual communicators can do certain things. I will come to that in a minute. But one thing is also, this is something that is larger, right? The entire information sphere, social media, the tech giants, right? Disinformation, that is not something that we are going to solve as individual communicators. This is something at such a large scale that at the end of the day, only lawmakers, regulators, and the big tech giants will be able to sort this out. They have algorithms that go through their basically all the videos that are being uploaded and just check them if they're deepfakes or not. The problem is that most deepfakes, especially in the United States, are protected under the First Amendment, right? It's freedom of speech. You can just put this out and nobody can tell you not to do it. You could go after them afterwards for libel, slander, whatever it may be, but putting the videos themselves out is not illegal per se, right? The European Union is a little bit more stringent with that. They came up and they're coming up with more legislation that is outlawing deep fake use in political sphere, and only really like allowing it for commentary and satire. There are certain states in the United States that have outlawed certain types of deepfakes, but that hasn't been tested in court yet. It's not quite clear if that is going to, or if those laws are really going to stand. So again, right, the platforms need to do something about it. The regulators need to do something about it. Now let's come to what can we do as communicators. Number one is education, education, education. If you don't know what it is, and you don't spot it and you're not literate in it. And as we talked about it before, Photoshop, we learned how to live with Photoshop, right, up to a certain point. And we will have to get the same amount of literacy when it comes to voice, moving images, and all that kind of stuff, right? That's just, there is no quick way around it. If it's malicious or disinformation, we need to treat it like any other malicious media or disinformation, right? We need to have a crisis communication plan, right? And see like would a debunking plan, right, or pre-bunking plan, are we easy targets? Is it likely that we're going to be targeted, right? You run your crisis communication planning, and it's different between organizations, right? So if you're in the political sphere, if you're in the LGBTQ plus sphere, right, nonprofit, unfortunately, you're much more likely to be targeted by trolls. And then you have to be prepared for this, right? If you're working for other companies, your risk might not be that high, but that is something that you simply have to factor into your crisis communication planning. And again, like you do pre-debunking, right? You have in your planning, you're debunking how you're going to answer to that after the fact, but you don't want to be caught like the deer in the headlight, right? You want to be like, I got this, I know what this is, I have a protocol for this. Pre-bunking, there was a video out of the Ukrainian president Volodymyr Zelensky where he was asking his forces to surrender. That was fake, right? It was not very well done, but they had already said before, and we're waiting for the Russians to put out a video right like that. So when it came out, everybody was like, we know what that is, right? And it really didn't gain any traction, right?
Yeah.
So that is also a tool you can use. And monitor your media, right? There is, Meltwater, Hootsuite, Pulsar. There are all these media monitoring platforms, and they have partnered up with NewsGuard right by now. NewsGuard is a company and a webpage that rates news sources by their veracity, right? So you can look at the with your search terms at your social media stream in real time. Because if there's a deep fake or something on the periphery, it's not necessarily going to affect you, right? But once this becomes viral, or you really see it's getting retweeted, it's being distributed, right? That is when you want to be able to step in and say, like, all right, we really got to get into gear here, because once that comes out at scale, we need to be able to answer to that. And also partner, depending on the size of your organization, what you do. There are consultants by now that really specifically focus on that. So it may be worth to talk to them, right? If you're a very large organization that is at risk, maybe have them on speed dial. And what we also need to do on a larger scale, because the biggest risks are really in the political arena, right? Because in Gabon, there was an example where a deep fake triggered a coup, right? Because they didn't know if the president was real, who was on television, and everybody cried deep fake, right? And it created so much uncertainty and unrest that the military tried to stage a coup, right? So this is not just futuristic stuff that may happen. There have been instances where CEOs transferred money because somebody cloned the voice of and just asked to transfer money. And so we also have to help other countries, like have something like, for example, like the World Health Organization, just for information, right? That if, for example, a country is targeted that cannot handle these kind of attacks, that the industrialized nations can step in and offer them assistance. So that is how we deal with it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm encouraged because we said 3 things that are very familiar to PR practitioners. Number 1 is building trust. We know how important that is. When you have built trust and you keep putting blocks on that foundation of trust, which means being true to who you are as a brand, being true to your company's vision, mission, and values, and saying and acting and doing things that are completely aligned, your audience really begins to know who you are and who you trust. And when something comes that is completely outside of that, your audience will be more likely to trust you and to distrust the misinformation. So we know about that. We know about building trust and protecting our client's reputation by building that foundation of integrity. The second thing that you said is monitoring, which is another tool that's very familiar to PR pros. So monitoring can help us to keep control of that messaging and ensure that what's out there is really truthful. And then the third thing that you said, I don't remember.
Crisis plan.
Plan.
Pre-bunking and debunking. I love that term,
One of my
pre-bunking.
favorite parts of this job is proactive crisis communications planning. And so I am definitely going to, because I've been guilty of not calling out deep fakes and crisis plans, but from this point on, I will be very mindful about that as well and having a plan around that, because I've just not done it. So thank you for, equipping me with something that I wasn't doing and helping our audience to be better prepared. It is pretty scary. And I think, we know that it's possible in our corporate realms, although we've seen it here in the United States more in politics. And it's one of the things that has driven the division in our country. We're so divided, and you hear people all the time saying, they're even divided around what outlets they believe and which ones they don't. And some of those beliefs are so deeply entrenched that you couldn't convince people to continue to be neutral, to research, to check, to fact check, and then to go beyond that and fact check. There are some people that believe that even the sources that we know that we can go to check information, they don't believe those either. So there's a portion of the country we won't be able to help. But even for consumers, becoming more educated around, doing your research and not accepting things at face value is probably a good lesson to take away.
Yeah, definitely.
If I may tie into one thing that you mentioned about the crisis communication planning, right? That is something that is very important. So deep fakes come from a very unappetizing corner of the internet. The first instances of deep fakes come from porn website, right? Where they used footage of celebrities and put it on the faces of porn actors, right? Non-consensual porn. And what has happened, and that is something that needs to be factored in crisis communication planning, that deepfakes doesn't target a company, it targets a person usually, right? And if you, for example, have a woman of color who works in the LGBTQ plus sphere, right? And that person becomes a target of a smear campaign like that, it is not just your reputation, your professional reputation that suffers, right? It is assaulting you as a person. And there have been instances where that happened. So I think companies that feel they may be at risk need to basically also think about this, right? That they support people if something like that may happen, not just from a professional point of view, but understand that this is far more wide-reaching and that they will take that home. Right. And I think that is important to mention, that needs to be part of a crisis communication plan. Like once they go home, let's not just say, all right, reputation is safe, but let's help them if they become victims of an attack.
That's a really good point. Because you're right. I mean, it is the person that gets targeted. And I think that people who, we have a lot of PR pros that are very active, and they're very active in community and worldwide and societal issues, and they serve clients that are very outspoken advocates as well. So if you're on the wrong side of an issue, in some people's minds, that definitely makes you a target. We talked a lot about, mismal, disinformation, and the negative aspects of deepfakes and synthetic media, but talk a little bit about, this technology and the positive and how it can be a help to us.
100%. And that is also something where we need to educate ourselves, because the fear of the medium prevents us from using it and also shine as communicators, right? So that synthetic media stuff, you can do incredible stuff with that, right? The text to image, right? You create things that were impossible before that, especially for low budget stuff. There was a video with David Beckham, right, where he had a malaria PSA and he spoke 4 or 5 different languages. right? You can, there is a company that is called Synthesia. And you can basically, it's kind of like a rented deepfake, right? If you want to do a PSA, you don't want to hire the filmmakers in the studio and everything. You just type it, and they have an entire library of people who will just put it up for you. And it's obviously much cheaper. You can change stuff at any point because it's not foamed, it's synthetic, right?
Yeah.
And they're going to blow up. I think it's a pretty neat business model that they're having there. So there are a lot of fun stuff. Kendrick Lamar just came out with a video, right, where he basically morphed into different deep fakes of other artists, right? So there is a lot of creative potential out there. So it's not just a downside, and you can shine if you master this technology. You can pitch this stuff, and everybody's going to be impressed.
That's great. That's great. So that's one thing we can look forward to in the future. What overall do you see as the future outlook? You know, we know there's of course the dark side, but when we use our powers for good.
Well, it's always going to be in the middle. I mean, I think
Yeah.
disinformation and deepfakes are part of that, is a real
Yeah.
problem. We're gonna have to address that, because if we are honest, so far, the dark side is winning a little bit, right?
Agreed.
The information sphere has really degraded over the last couple of years,
Agreed.
and so that definitely needs to be stuff. Having said that, the tech always is faster than regulators, right? If you look at, there's a lot, the European Union had a lot of legislation by now, and if they have it, the tech platforms will have to do it worldwide, because it's very hard for them to scale it for individual countries.
Sure.
You also see legislation here, so hopefully some stuff is going to be sorted out. And one thing is like, I mean, everything is going to become much more immersive, right? And that's basically next stage, really, with deepfakes, the metaverse, right? People just have avatars, right? You
Right.
may just have a scanner camera, a 3D scanner camera, a LiDAR up there, right? That just reads you, and you can be in the metaverse. You can be a pink zebra if you choose to do so, right? I mean, it's like, and that all has risks, but it also has a lot of creativity, right? And the deepfake technology, that you can basically just take somebody's likeness and translate it into something else, is basically part of the underpinning of the metaverse. So there's going to be a lot of exciting stuff happening on that front.
Well, it
Really
does.
like this, and I
Yeah.
think, for all of us, I love that you said that, like, some had a lot of negative associated with it, but we can't, to use the old expression, throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
It's embracing all of it, understanding how to navigate the next, because when you look at just the technology and the possibilities, my brain is turning with, wow, there's some cool things that you can do
Hmm.
for your clients, and it can be a game changer because it's not something that everyone is able to offer. So being able to offer richer storytelling mediums and vehicles just seems really exciting to me.
Hmm.
I'm still a little blown away too that, so Natalie Portman didn't dance in the Black Swan.
She
I mean,
did
I would have watched
not.
one ballerina, but you showed like a whole cast of ballerinas, and I'm just still a little stunned by some of the stuff you shared. So I'm gonna take the afternoon and really have to sit on this.
Well, and it's so true. I mean, just when we thought, we were getting a handle on, social media with, the I hate to say the word fake news stories and bots on Twitter, now I think I'm so smart. You're a bot. And now I see there is so much more to be suspicious of. But forewarned is forearmed, which is good. So now we're
Yeah,
all a little bit smarter thanks to you, Axel. We really appreciate you, and
yeah.
this was chock full of great information that is just going to be so helpful to all of us as communicators and just as consumers of content too, because I think, like you said, education, that is so important, and we cannot lose that race. But
And just to close the cycle of where I
yeah.
started, communication will become more technical, right?
Mhm.
And there is no way around it, if we like it or not, right? And we also, when we embrace it, right, we get the creative juices flowing, right?
Yeah.
So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, there's a lot of emerging technologies. Find me on LinkedIn, Axel Ebermann. I post about that stuff all the time. right?
Super.
They're making kind of 3-dimensional fish tanks right now, where you don't have zoom on zoom anymore, but you see it in 3D and stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening on that front, right? So if I post about that stuff all the time because it interests me and it's also my background, that's a good source.
And we
Excellent.
will definitely have your contact information in our show notes. And
Yes.
we encourage, our communicators who joined us live today to rewatch this video and take some good notes. Check out the show notes when they come out on Monday. Share this episode, the visual episode or the podcast that we'll produce on Monday morning, because this is really important information for communicators, and we want to not keep this good stuff to ourselves but share it within our industry. Axel, I cannot thank you enough for being with us today and educating us, and I am sure that we are going to have an opportunity to chat with you again. This has been amazing. Hopefully you really are Axel and not bot Axel.
Who knows?
Yeah, next time, maybe give us a test. We'll see if we pass.
Yeah, I should show up the next time just with a different face and just see what you how you react.
There are days that I think, could I do something with this face?
Yeah,
Can
right.
I have a little work done without having the work done?
Yeah.
Anyway.
You can already. I mean, that's by the way, it's the same technology, right? The filters
Yeah.
that take out your wrinkles and eyeshadows and all that kind of stuff that you can do on Zoom stuff by now. It is kind of the same stuff, right? It's just it just changes more, right? But the idea is the same.
Yeah. Well, this has
Love
been
it.
incredible. Well, thank you, Axel. Thank you to our listeners out there. And we so appreciate you and everyone listening. And until next time, thanks for joining us on That Solo Life.